Meli, you wanted to say something?
Solamente una advertencia de nuevo para los que no saben, la traducción en español está disponible, los canales. Eso, entonces, si no eres bilingüe, si solo hablas en español, puedes escoger el canal en español. If you are English speaker only, you can choose the English channel. Y si eres bilingüe, puedes quedarte en el canal original. If you are bilingual, you can stay in the original channel. Thank you.
Thank you,
Go
Meli.
ahead.
Well, first of all, let me say that I feel so nourished in this call because I see so many familiar faces, starting with Meli. I hope you get a chance to listen to some of her other conversations because she's amazing and we've learned so much together and I've learned so much from her. So yes, very nice to see so many familiar faces. I see a lot of people from Edward's class from the WUSI. That's also awesome. A lot of students that I have had the privilege to teach some of what I know. So let me start before we go into the logistics or the objective of this session. I would like to do something, and I would like to share this story very briefly about sequoia trees. When we think of life, we know that it was created 3.8 billion years ago, and it has evolved, and all of that story, and we can picture ecosystems evolving, and we get it, but it's kind of abstract, right? So when I went to the Sequoia National Park in California, that hosts these amazing beings, sequoia trees that are between 2,000 and 4,000 years old, I was just like, blown away. I couldn't grasp the idea that there could be beings that were older than the recorded time that Jesus was here and the Buddha was here. And I could sense the wisdom that they held, right? I could sense a presence of, we're right here and we got this and we know what we're doing. So it was so nice to be able to touch it. It was the first time I was able to touch this wisdom and not just perceive it or, understand it conceptually or, in such an abstract way. So I want to say that these trees are the oldest beings on Earth. There are other kind of plants that are even older, but those, they clone themselves. So for the non-cloning ones, these trees are really the oldest. And they go to 23 stories high, and they are just amazing. They have this chemistry around its core that allows them to protect them from fires and from bugs and all of these things. So this intelligence and these strategies that have helped them, to me, was just amazing. So I guess the first question that I would like to ask everyone that is here, if you can just briefly write it in the chat, or you can always unmute, of course, and share with the rest of the group, is do you have a practice to bring life at the center in your daily life or in your working life? Whatever it is. So for example, I hold a shell in the middle of my desk. Sometimes I have a plant, in what ways do you consciously bring life to the center of your life, especially the working life and the business life? That is what we're going to be talking about today. So if you could share that would be awesome. As I move us to a little bit of the introductions of our who your hosts are going to be today and how amazing this conversation is going to be today. So I'm going to tell you briefly about myself, and then I'm going to tell you and introduce you to the magic of Jenny, and then I will let her introduce herself, and then we will come back and just go over how this is going to work and how we're going to make the best for everyone to be able to bring their genius. So my story, I'm just going to briefly say, started mostly, or my awakening started when I was preparing to have my first child, and I said, what would a business look like if it was as healthy and as abundant as nature, right? Very simple question. I had already worked in finance, some Dow Jones Sustainability Indexes, Triodos Bank, for those of you that are in Europe, headquarters. So I knew the finance side, I knew the business side. I had a very fond feeling for business guardians because of my dad, and I worked with him for a long time. And I love nature. So how do I mix these things up? And in the journey of discovering this answer, I just got to meet amazing people like Edward and Ben and Melly and Isabel. I don't know if you're there. And Jenny, of course, and amazing people. So I can only be thankful for asking the question. And I think that's what we want to do today. What happens when we actually ask the question and try to search authentically for the answers, no? And how much richness that brings to our lives. So I've worked as external consultant for Biomimicry 3.8 for a long time, strategic advisor for Savory Foundation, and I work with Fortune 100 companies as well as small NGOs. It's just been a privilege. I have a co-founding partner at Dear Wise Earth, Gregorio, my dear colleague, and the group of advisors he brings to the table, such as Martin von Hildebrand from Fundación Gaia Amazonas, and just it's been an honor to have asked that question and service those business guardians for this long. Because those business guardians to me are just the potential, nature's potential unleashed, to be unleashed. Let me see. So in one of my journeys, in one of my stops, adventures in this journey, is where I met Jenny. And I really like Jenny because Jenny, she's like super sharp and goes very deep into one conversation, and you're like, whoa, I'm learning so much. And then out of the blue, she makes a joke, and then like everything changes, and it's usually a joke about herself. So I think of her like a regenerative disruptor, joyful disruptor, or something like that. So Jenny, I pass the word to you. If you could be so nice to introduce yourself, and so we can start with the rest of the session.
Carolina, thank you for that jolly introduction. I was really interested to see in the chat how many of us really do connect to trees as our practice, or look at the birds out of the window. And so I'm sitting here right now, you can't see them, but my next door neighbour's garden is absolutely full of birds. She is a bird feeder par excellence, and the amount of biodiversity in her small garden is astonishing. But my journey is similar and different to Carolina's, and I think we all have very different journeys that lead up to a point where we start to think about life very differently. So for probably 25 years of my working life, I spent time working for global businesses, like some good ones like Patagonia and Timberland, who really early on were looking, even in the 80s and 90s, at early types of sustainability, but also working for organizations like GlaxoSmithKline, Mars, Unilever, and Cargill, who probably were not. And I worked on strategic communications and sustainability narratives, and worked with the UN and the EU looking at food systems. And I guess rather than stopping and asking a question, I got to a point where I really felt I was smacking my head against a brick wall until it would be as soft as a baked apple. And that certainly, was a time for me to start to look and think about things differently. And at the same time as that was suddenly occurring to me, I kind of went down with an advanced form of cancer, and there's nothing like that to take you out and give you time to think intelligently about what you're doing and what your role is in the world. So today I'm a founder of a very small community interest company and consultancy called Really Regenerative Centre, which we set up in March 2020, the worst time ever to set up a new business of any kind. But we were very inspired, and I think you'll have heard Isabel talk about this, by Dunmello Meadows' vision of bioregional learning centres. And although we're a very young green shoot, we work with individuals, teams, and organizations who want to build regenerative capacity around regenerative design principles, but mainly in the context of place today and systems evolution, which is, we're a very young shoot. We do a lot of work weaving partnerships and collaborations across bioregions, particularly in my own in Sussex, but also in the Azores, in Scotland, and currently also across in Abu Dhabi. So that's enough about me, but I think it's for those multiple reasons that Carolina invited me to contribute to her session today, so I hope I can.
Nice, thank you, Jenny. Thank you everyone for your comments on the chat. And so in this session, we will be exploring 3 questions, and we're gonna get to them. But the first question, so the question number 0, is if you could share again in the chat box, or you can always unmute your microphone and share with us, what brought you to this session? What brought you to this session? Anything is acceptable, from looking for answers, I own a business, I'm curious, just share with us a little bit so we can little by little start to get to know who's around here. Good. So let me tell you the objective. The objective of this session is that by the end, we finish with, as a team, we finish with a bigger understanding or a better understanding of what a regenerative business is. There's been a lot of conversation around this area, and is it regenerative enough or not? A lot of businesses are saying they are regenerative. I think they can say they are aiming to get towards regeneration, but very few companies are really regenerative, right? So we want to have that conversation here as a group. What do we think as a group is a regenerative business? So that's going to be the first question. That's one of the objectives. And of course, in answering their questions, we will get insights, and we will get hopefully very, very punctual practices we can apply to our everyday business life, right? So yes, we want to talk about the big conversation, but in exploring that conversation, we want to reach some very specific points that we can take with us. The logistics of this is we explore these 3 questions. Jenny and I will be sharing our own perspective on each of these questions. And then we open the conversation and see how that was received by you, and if there's anything else to add to that, of course. So let me, maybe I should probably copy paste the first question. But as I do that, Jenny, we have the first question. So I'm gonna say it out loud, and then I'll write it down in the chat box so we have it. But the first one is, what is the role and value of businesses, or for that matter, for any for-profit organization, within the larger regenerative movement? And I know you are very active, and you have asked this question a long time ago. So please, share with the group how you would answer this question.
Me.
Jenny.
Okay.
Sorry, I was looking at you and I thought that was enough.
I was like, I thought you were, for a second there, I thought you were looking at somebody else. So Carolina, you have a lot of experience of working with businesses from a regenerative perspective. Me less so these days, but so what could I say about this? So if I think of it from, because we're here at the Bioregional Regeneration Summit, if I think about it from a bioregional perspective, in the work that we do, bioregional health applies to both the life support systems on which humans depend, water, soil, forests, air, oceans, but also the health of the human systems, both cultural and economic. And those 3 things are really deeply woven together. So a healthy bioregion is, and I know that there were discussions earlier about, what is a definition of bioregioning, and regretfully I missed those. But a healthy bioregion my sense is that when the human systems we've designed for ourselves are in partnership with the life support systems on which we depend, and both are evolving forwards into the future in harmony, creating the conditions conducive to life, as Janine Benyus often says, to continue together. So I guess that means every living entity within a bioregion has a role to play in creating that harmony, and that includes businesses. And so as a regenerative designer, I deeply believe that the role of humans within the living system on Earth is not just to be guardians of our living systems, but catalysts of evolution of those systems in which they sit. So the question then becomes, how do businesses find that role and fulfill it? And how do people find that role and fulfill it? And I guess if we had fulfilled Danella's vision of having these repositories of deep knowledge of the biological health of each of our bioregions, as Isabel is doing in Devon, and many of you may be doing, it might be easier for businesses. But as it is today, they really have to find their own. And that starts with developing a really deep systemic understanding of the existing health of the bioregion or place in which their businesses are situated, and finding where those critical touch points of their businesses are in that system. But it also does mean really looking at that intelligence and connecting to the intelligence of natural systems, which you spoke about, Carolina, with that experience of the sequoia trees. And it means understanding the patterns and processes of economy, ecology, and culture that have caused a place to thrive throughout time, and interpret those processes in the context of the challenges of the 21st century. So when you have that intelligence at your fingertips and you've connected to it, the role or the vocation, if you like, that a business can play in a bioregion becomes more clear. And maybe to give a real live example of that, I don't know how many people on the call are familiar, wave your hand, with Interface. Anybody come across a business called Interface? So I think one of the early sort of really good programs that a business did was Interface's Networks program. Interface produces industrial carpet tiling, uses a lot of a particular type of plastic, which is the same as the plastic that is used in industrial fishing nets. So maybe an early bioregional initiative was working with the government and the fishing communities in the Philippines to recover discarded plastic netting from the oceans and the coral reefs, parcel it back and send it back for recycling and reuse, but at the same time earn an income from doing that, which helped to stabilize the social life of those villages who were becoming poorer and poorer as fishing stocks declined, and then the health of the coral reefs began to return. So I think that was a very early example of how a business, a global business even, could look at the specific bioregions that was having an impact on and choose to have a restorative role, in this case, perhaps not yet regenerative, but it is a journey towards that. So that was a really long answer to your question.
Nice.
So I'm going to stop there.
No, Jenny, I would like to dig a little bit deeper. We were talking about this the other day of, you've been approaching this since the very beginning from this embeddedness property of life, right? So how there is a life and having the bioregion be the unit of life for regeneration, because there is a watershed that grows in the center and water is life, and that's what defines the limits of the bioregion. And then we have the social species, the culture, right, which is one of the species of the system. And then we have the human constructs, whether that's finance or business or technology or whatever.
Or whatever it is.
And I love thinking of it as a lot of people have difficulty thinking of business, that businesses could be regenerative. But I find it very easy to think that the business is misaligned because it is nature, by the way. We are all nature, and we emanated from nature, so therefore we're nature, but we are a little bit misaligned, or a lot. And like nature also creates degenerative systems, but they go to the extinction pool and they have already gone extinct. So we don't want to do that. And so when you talk about listening to the intelligence of the place and how that permeates through the layer of culture and a life-centered culture and through the layer of business, then we have this very healthy business that is aligned and that is able to, potentialize, catalyze, expand not only life but opportunities for the human. The more misaligned we are, we destroy life and we don't have any opportunities. The fact that we start to understand this alignment and the way you bring it up, I like it very much, which is we're not doing this for Earth, but we're doing it for every living system, including humans and including our human constructs. And it's not just about what we can learn, but what we can learn in order to contribute back, right? And that's a very different narrative, for example, from the sustainable narrative, which goes very much into minimize impact, don't exist, become small, don't breathe by preference, to a narrative where we say, as if we're smart as nature and intelligence as nature and loving as nature, we're going to be aligned and we're going to know how to work in the same way and impact in the same way and have the same health and abundance. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing or that you have done in your bioregion and how you work with the businesses in helping them find their role in this bioregion?
I'd love to say we're at that stage in my own bioregion. Sussex, for those of you who don't know where it is, it's south of London, south part of England, and it operates in the shadow of one of the world's most dominant business as usual finance centres, and it's very dominated by its relationship to that. So the last 3, 4, 5 years have very much been about weaving connections across those who are guardians responsible for living systems, those who have businesses that are connected to those living systems, so food and agriculture, viticulture, and building connections across the economic systems so that people, organizations who drive economic strategy in the region, business communities. So it's taken 4 or 5 years to start to even get to a point where those different stakeholders in life in this bioregion don't think in silos alone. So that has taken a considerable amount of time. So I've approached it from going to the wider systems first to come in and bring the businesses in behind that. So we're now, for example, having the kind of conversations in one part of our bioregion, which is on the coast, about what a regenerative economic future would look like and how businesses can play a role in that. So we're literally only just arriving at that stage. So, though I would love to point to individual businesses that are taking that on, that is really coming up in the region where I am, a lot through regenerative agriculture. But having said that, the regenerative agriculture businesses that are emerging are owned and run by, in the main, private estates and people with hedge fund husbands who've bought them £20 million estates to play at regenerative agriculture. So we're not touching on privilege here yet. which is a huge part of the conversation that is in the context of the UK and Europe, but I think is probably also a really contextual conversation to have all around the world, because, you know, regenerative agriculture can't be about privileged access. But that's a big conversation for a different workshop, maybe, rather than this one. I don't want to go off at a tangent here.
It's so easy. There is so much to discuss. I just want to acknowledge some of the comments on the chat. Definitely that contribution of the business in finding its role within the bioregion is to strengthen its regenerative capacities, right? And I also saw the comment of profit, and maybe we can go into that part in the second and third questions, and for those students at Universidad de Cooperación Internacional, we saw that just yesterday, the role of profit. And then something.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm just very curious to hear from people in the room what your views are about the role of business. I'm seeing lots in the chat, but if anybody would like to unpop and share, I'm really curious. I'm curious to hear what your thinking is about what we've shared so far, but I'm really curious about what you think the role of business could be.
Yes, Jenny.
Come on, otherwise I might start to pick on you, and that would be really mean.
I want to respond to that. Oh, Raya, go ahead, Raya.
Hey everybody, how is everyone? Thanks for being here. And I think what comes to mind for me immediately, and what I spend a lot of time thinking about, is Melina, Edward, maybe some others know, is the role of business as an activator of agency for people, because fundamentally the economy is vocation. It's people out there doing work, and it's not going to get done if people aren't paid to actually, be doing this regenerative work. And, I'm really passionate and curious about ways in which we can, shift resources and funding from a more mainstream, area in business into basically being like undercover regenerative Robin Hoods, putting them into bioregional projects, and really getting young people involved as well. So I guess, my biggest perspective on it is exactly that. It's business is the largest, arguably, driver of, the economy. So without it, it's not going to happen. It's just about how we can have these conversations like today to actually, galvanize more and more people to be active and participating. Yeah.
Thanks, Rhea. I think what you bringing up there is the complexity of systems evolution when it comes to businesses. Is there's this complex weaving of the finance system, the legal system, the business models that are available. That it's not as we wish it was simple, but it's not necessarily that simple. But I think that cultural aspect that you're bringing up there is really an important part of it's kind of like a layer cake in many ways. If we don't have thriving living systems, we're all in the proverbial poo. But the cultural and the economic constructs that humans have put over the top of those living systems, that cultural element is as important. What I see where I am, and in many places I work, is the cultural is coming through participative democracy processes, and that is in a lot being driven by local authorities and mayors and city authorities rather than business. So I think that is a big conversation that businesses could have with themselves: is what does participatory democracy look like for us? when we're engaging with other people. But yeah, I don't want to go off a tangent here. And there are other people with their hands up.
Yes, I think it was Meli who raised it next, and then Eduardo.
Okay, my question is more about how this business have changed so much of the mentality, of the way of life of many people. So in countries in Latin America, I can see that now they are not treated like a fisherman, for example. They are treated like a little entrepreneurs. But the style of life of both things are completely different. And it is like a pushing, like the force of monetary system, pushing their style lives in such a way that, you know, they have to become entrepreneurs, but they are just fishermen, you know, like, or whatever, or campesinos, or, you know, like, so this is kind of weird for me, like, to understand, and that flow of life through a way of living, like the imposition and the colonization of a way of living for many people in the world.
Can I give it a go very, very quickly? Because you asked a very big question. Difficult to answer, I think, for any of us. But I think business, it is the cause and the symptom, right? So there is this colonization, and one of the parts is the business part. And so if we scope the business by itself, knowing how it relates to the macro and the micro, then we know how to align it better to nature. What I want to say is, I totally agree, and I lived that when I was a kid. I should go into the audience. I lived that. I sensed the transition between the work my dad was doing and how he had to change it because of the North American Free Trade Agreement, right? Totally different way of structuring, thinking, mindset, relationship to Earth, very different. He never stopped his relationship towards Earth, but that didn't help the structure. So I think we all know this, but for those that are already in the business mindset, or that have to conform to certain structures, that too can be healed, right? That's when we start talking about regenerative business. And Meli, I don't want, there was much more in that question, but I really want to pass the word to Eduardo. Yes.
Hello. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And speaking specifically about regenerative agriculture, I've explored a couple of different regions, and I had contact with people in Brazil, people in Mexico, and people in Germany and the United States, and the landscape is completely different in every place, as you can imagine, right?
Yep.
United States and Europe are very, very mechanized, and all the farmers are within an industry that is very, very well structured and acts like a machine. And the challenge and the role of business is how to shift profitability models, how to shift the mindset of an awareness of the profitability of regenerative for farmers. And there's cases. I mean, there's this whole documentary called Kiss the Ground, and shows in the United States, you know, how this person went off of welfare, he called it, basically saying no to all the subsidies for soy and corn, and doing regenerative. In Europe, have seen models implemented, and the role of business, to answer that very question, is really to decompose. I mean, business is really good at decomposing and understanding the little pieces, and bringing part pieces together to make it work. And big challenge is the bridge, you know, the transition, the 5 years that it takes for a farmer to go from the current system to the fully productive regenerative system. And so finance plays a big role. So when everybody comes together and understand, hey, you know, credit in agriculture is no longer a 6 month turnaround, it's a 7-year proposal. Things start happening. So that's in the north. In the south, they see it's a lot more complex, I believe. Some people say that it's a lot simpler because we have, like I'm here in Baja California, and I see the regenerative practices uh, being implemented by indigenous communities without calling it that way, right? And they have refused the industrial system.
Yes.
And so the question here is like, hey, how can we really help these people really continue to expand that practice? But I mean, that's the other extreme, right? I mean, we go and speak with them and they say, you know what, we don't need to expand. I mean, we have what we need right here and that's it. I mean, we don't need to do anything else, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely a difficult question to answer because it depends on where.
And I love the fact that you just brought indigenous knowledge, right? So how can we make a financial system that is based on the bioregion? And Edward is here, and he has been working a lot in trying, because business is a subset of the larger financial and economic system as it is now. So how can we start having localized economies? And there are many alternative economies that are coming up, so that the financial sector is not being that negative factor like Meli was pointing to, right? Killian.
Sorry.
Yes, it's Jesse.
There we go. Hi, I think she
Oh.
called from, yeah.
Killian?
So I'm so to take things a little bit fundamentally, I have a hard time with this term of regenerative finance because those two ideas just don't match. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. I would have zero problem with the discussion if it was called financing regenerative systems. But when you're saying regenerative finance, that has a different meaning. Those words have meaning. And it's just like calling, you know, wind power renewable energy. It's not only is it not renewable, it's not sustainable either. Same thing here, right? So businesses, no business is regenerative and no business can be regenerative. And we could, you know, that gets into how they function. And if you look at the functioning of a business, what does it do? It requires taking more out than it put in. That's what it inherently does. So we can talk about all these other things that they do and everything else, but we have to do it with an awareness that a business inherently is depleting a system. And then if you do that and you say, okay, what is the role of business? If it is a depleting mechanism, if it sucks energy out of a system, then what can its role be? And then you get into issues that we'd call in permaculture, things such as bridging technologies and appropriate technology, where you do use technology, you know, because it already exists. You wouldn't create an unsustainable technology to create regenerative, because that's just foolish. That's going backwards. But you do use what's already there. You can use what you already have because the damage has already been done. And so now you can choose to use it to leverage down into sustainability, down into regenerativeness. And that's, to me, how we have to frame the conversation around business. And I just really would strongly say, let's please stop saying regenerative business, because there's no such thing. But we can say a role of business can be, while they can still exist, which may not be much longer, that what businesses need to be doing is facilitating the transition to regenerative business. That's the best they can do, because we can't end up at a place of businesses. We have to end up in a place of commons. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Killian. This is so important. Thank you for expressing that. And yes, I would.
It's a huge discussion, that one.
It's a huge discussion, yes. But I'm sure Edward has something to say. And then really, we have 20 minutes or so. So
yeah.
Well,
In a way, I think what Killian has said, and not to want to bring you in, Edward and Paul, because I see that you've got your hands up, in a way does sort of lead into the next question that we were going to explore to a certain extent, which was around if businesses can be regenerative, or if they can't be regenerative, really was to sort of look at what kind of qualities would those, let's call them entities, have to have to be able to make a value adding contribution to a living system? Which was where we were going to go next. But Carolina, we can carry on where we are if you would prefer.
I think, Edward, I'm putting the spotlight on you because I want you to express what you wanted to express and maybe lead us a little bit to the next question, which has to do with which attributes would be present in this if these regenerative businesses were to exist, and I think they do. What characteristics could they have? But I know there's so much you can share with us on the past question and on the question we want to head toward.
Simple answer is business can be regenerative, and we have the Sistema B, for example, which has to have positive outcomes for nature, positive outcomes for money, and for people. But I'd like to go a step backwards. And when I hear these discussions, it has a lot to do what our surrounding is and paradigms we live in and things we think about. And I get more and more the feeling that, and I don't want to be like a generalist here, but in the northern, business is considered one thing. In the south, business can be considered something else. Yeah. And I just mentioned in the chat, for example, yesterday I was with cattle producers. And we know that cattle can fix a huge amount of carbon, and if done properly, it can increase biodiversity. And we're actually working with them to give back 30% of each farm to biodiversity conservation, biological corridors. So they're for profit. They need to survive. They need to make money, but they're working on turning 200,000 hectares into a carbon sink that will compensate Costa Rica's emissions completely. And they're going to be making money with it. So yes, business can be regenerative, but also the thing is, we want to push everything into making money as a fundamental cornerstone of business. And that is where I disagree a little bit. The same thing with impact investors. You know, if you work with community farms, and we've done several of them to promote local development, you know, local production, local consumption, working with hotels to buy directly from communities, from fishermen and so on, which turns the whole thing into regenerative, because the money flow and the inclusion of people is highly important. But we don't need to push everybody to generate interest on an investment and payback on investment. Sometimes the well-being of people is also profit in terms of non-monetary profit, but actually what we're looking for is getting people to live better. So at the local level, we need to look at really active, inclusive economies. You can call them whatever you want. And I think we spend too much time defining things. I don't care what regenerative agriculture is. It's a gradient. I don't care if a good friend of mine keeps interrupting me and saying, you have to call it agroecology. You cannot say regenerative, you know, and for example, in the North, permaculture is something. I have a good friend who works with me here, Mel Landers. He always says, farmers need permaculture without the philosophy. You know, you don't need the yoga and all these drawings in the permaculture to produce food, good quality food. So it's a world vision. That's what the North calls it. I call it the spiritual dimension, spiritual cultural dimension in the South is what actually matters here, and it changes. So I don't think there will be recipes or rules, or I don't think we should waste time in defining precisely what regenerative is. For the corporate world, that might be good to be able to say this is greenwash and this is regenerative. But for the world itself, it will be a transition. It will be a transition to a third horizon, and there will be many colors in that rainbow. So I don't care what the direct outcome is at the short term. It might be regenerative on the long term. So let's quit fighting about definitions and terms and just really move forward into a movement that will create conditions for life.
That's, you know, I think what you're touching on there is where it's so important, because in complex, you know, the system, the horizon one, if you like, if everyone's familiar with the 3 horizons of the framework, that is the system that is dying, and the regenerative system, a world that is trying to be born. one doesn't go, one doesn't arrive. And it's a complex, there's a whole load of disruptive things that happen in the middle, and they happen at different times and in different ways and in different places. I think the food system is always, because it's such a critical connector across all of our systems, I think it's one that we focus on a lot. And as I see regenerative agriculture growing bit by bit in the UK, I work with Unilever in their dairy farms and see them starting to bring their business strategies down to a bioregional level. So having different profit and investment models for regenerative farming in North Africa than they would in the US, than they would in Europe. Do I think Unilever is generally the way in which they farm dairy a good thing for the sustainability of the world? Probably not. But they're coming downwards towards meeting better criteria, and the groundswell that's coming upwards through permaculture or regenerative agriculture or smallholder, the peasant movement farming in Asia and South America is filtering upwards. And what we have to hope is that everybody in some way is moving towards a system for life rather than a system that depletes life. But it's complex and it's messy, and a dying system is a living system too, and it fights to continue to exist, and it isn't going to go quietly. So that's a really important point, I think, Edouard. Thank you for bringing that complexity in.
So I am going to propose that we stay a couple of minutes after. Melly just gave me permission to use this room for those of you that want to stay 10 to 10 minutes more, because I do really want to jump into the next question. And the next question has to do with these attributes. So let me step back a little bit and say this. If humans are nature, and businesses are created by humans, then businesses are living systems, living organisms. And as such, just like in nature, if you act as nature, you impact as nature, right? So that means that it's not only what they do. It's not, when we say regenerative business, it's not only what they do or how they impact, if it's only the social or the environmental or both, like there is no distinction. When you act as nature, you impact as nature, and when you impact as nature, you start acting like nature. So in some way, I invite us all to experience what it would feel like to really think of business as a living organism, right? So it's alive. It has an essence, it has a purpose, it has its development stages of formation, growth, death, maturity, death. It has structures, it has flows of the three things that flow in nature: material, information, and energy, and finance for business, money flows. It has collaboration, right? So let's give it a shot at trying to really incorporate this, knowing that businesses are also alive, and they are a living organism, or if you relate to it better, an ecosystem. And so the question is, what characteristics or what attributes come to mind that they should have? Now we can do this randomly. We can say, well, it should, I don't know, it should have impact positively. I love it, creates conditions conducive to life. It's decentralized, right? We can do this randomly. You can do this randomly and share, and we start having a conversation. Or we can go very specific and say its marketing, its communication, its information flows have to be open and transparent. Or its material flows. Let's stop talking about circularity, and please stop talking about upcycling, right? Or its mindset, its corporate culture, or just its purpose has to be life-centered. Or, so you can go generic, or we can go generic, or we can go specific. And this is going to bring a lot of insights, I think. So I'm going to I see 3 hands raised. And Paul, I would love if you can, I think you had a comment from the previous question.
Excuse
and
me,
maybe something to add.
I had my hand up before. I don't want to be
Sorry,
skipped
Jesse, I'm
over
so sorry
again.
about that. I didn't see it. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I've studied this very approach for decades, using as examples the sustainable systems that we find in business, the village market, which scrapes and saves to build the store up to a point where it can both sustain the family and a little vacation now and then and some educations and be part of the community and active, but does not do what is the problem, use that wealth to build wealth perpetually. And so there's a different design issue between businesses that are basically service industries, family service industries, and the financial system that steers the global economy, on which probably most of us on this call profit from with our investments, that our investments are managed to multiply our physical control over nature and over the minds of consumers to increase our impacts on nature toward the breaking point we now are having this conference to discuss how to get away from.
Yes.
But there's basically one solution, and well, one credible solution in my views. There are totalitarian solutions. There are collapse totally and regenerate solutions, which is to have a 300-year dark age or something like that and see if we'll forget how to misbehave. But I think it's important for us to learn how to behave, and that's to take our surplus resources and either apply them to our communities or to care of something else. And that's basically what nature's design is. When an organism like a human explodes by a factor of 1 to a trillion in the womb, well, that's extractive is crazy. And but then being pushed out into a world where it has to learn what to do is a totally different thing. Now, organisms can handle that surprise. I'm not sure people can. We're having a big problem with it, that we keep all the sustainability solutions turn out, if you look at them closely, as Killian has been suggesting, turn out to be sustaining the growth system. It's like climate change adaptation is to stop climate so we can continue growing, even though growth is the cause of climate change. So we are having difficulty with the emotional change, but the physical change is something we need to focus on and figure out how to do. And that's using our profits to care for the world and ourselves and take those profits away from feeding the growth system, which is causing all the complications. But to do that, you have to get everybody on board and have it presented and understood as in the self-interest of everybody, especially the managers who would know how to do it. And so anyway, that's what I focus on now, and that's my bit.
Thank you, Jesse. That's a very important bit. Can I say that I honor so much so many of us that are doing this for some time and some that are doing this for such a long time. I get this very clear idea in my head and in my heart and in my being that nature does not spend energy destroying something, but brings more life to life, so that the healed parts and the healthy parts can take care of the unhealthy parts. So I do believe that just like you and so many others that are here, like this is what the business is supposed to do, right? Bring life to those that have worked in this field for so many years and that know how to do it, on one side. And on the other, we have indigenous cultures that have done this for ages, and that not all of them. I'm being reductionistic when I say all indigenous cultures. There are so many. But those that have been able to live in nature. And that brings me to the youth that Raya started with. So how can we, in this transition from Horizon 1 to 3, how can we all be a force for good in that transition and not stop the block of what wants to emerge and bring everyone on board, because we need everyone, right? Paul, I'm gonna pass the word to you.
Can I come in?
Thanks, Carolina. Yeah, I just had three things to offer maybe. One is, I guess, looking at the discussion, the chat about business, and Paula's comment about, material flows becoming financial flows. I mean, there are some very obviously extractive businesses, mining businesses and oil businesses and so on, which we absolutely depend upon. And certainly from the perspective of the so-called green transition, we still depend upon those quite strongly. But you could also argue that every business goes through a phase, if you like, a paradigm of extraction, in the sense of extracting, even if it's intellectual capital, from people. So it's what I've learned and understood from Carol Sanford's work and Ben Haggard's work about paradigms is that, we have to embrace these paradigms, but we don't necessarily have to get stuck in them. So we can transcend those paradigms, I think, in a way they describe, from extractive all the way to regenerative. The second thing I was going to offer was around governance. So I think tacitly everybody here has got a critique of business at the moment, that it's exacerbating social inequalities. I certainly do. And I think what is helping my understanding of that is the issue that Kate Raworth highlights in her use of the donut in business, is that business needs to look at its governance, so that governance questions come to the fore for every business as a way of understanding their impact on social inequalities. And it's something, as I'm kind of actually saying it, I'm reminding myself I have to actually do with my own clients, or do more explicitly with my own clients. And the final thing I wanted to offer was around finance. And there's some research that Isabel and I did over the summer, which was really inspiring. And we can get into issues of what we call it, regenerative finance, or financing regenerative projects, or financing regenerative governance. It all means the same thing to me, so I wouldn't want to get lost in it. But what is critical is that, at least within a bioregion, we've understood the importance and place of local investors to finance, for example, social enterprise, cooperatives, community projects, and we're in the process of evolving that within our bioregion. So it can be, I think, extremely powerful if you change the frame of what does finance actually mean, or investment, what does that actually mean, and have that sort of hooked to a critique of what's happening in society, what the issues are in society, which they're supposed to regenerate. And the bioregion is a wonderful frame, I think we'd all agree, is a wonderful frame that the donut can indicate the limits of, which gives us some guidance as to what the ecological and social thresholds are there. So those are the three things I would offer.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice and very valuable, Paul. Raya.
Hi, sorry, I was getting carried away in the chat. I just wanted to quickly, I shared a link to an article that was written by Carol Sanford and Ben Haggard, I believe, called The Regenerative Economic Shaper Role. Yeah. And it's 4 parts. I would, I really enjoyed reading it. So if anybody wants to go and check it out, I would recommend it. But in that, something that really stood out for me as being, what they describe a regenerative business needing as components, going back to some of these first principles, is twofold. The first, an essence to essence connection. So loosely, to not overcomplicate it for how short time we have, ensuring that the essence of the business and the people actually within the business as employees are all aligned with the mission of being life-serving and what we've been discussing. But secondly, and arguably maybe most important, continued evolution and implementing practices and a way of being within that organization that is constantly reflecting, reframing, repositioning, rehiring, all of the things that are involved within that, to be not stagnating and stuck on any one paradigm or anything. And I really loved it because it was a very clever way, I thought, of bridging the practical application of what an organization could be, not saying this is exactly how one could go about it, because as we know, a regenerative business like a bioregion is very special and unique in its context, and there isn't a one size fits all approach, though at the same time it pulls on and draws on those really fundamental qualities, characteristics, principles of a regenerative way of being operating. So as a resource for people looking, to maybe, or wondering how can, I apply this into my business or an organization, or to share. I just thought it was a really important thing to mention and to bring into this.
Thank you, Ria. I've popped the first of those papers in the chat box. There's a whole series in there, and I think they're really worth reading. Just if you just scroll up, you'll find the first of the links. Ram, I think you've been waiting for a while. Are you still there?
Can I come in?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I've been listening patiently of the farming businesses, community farming societies working. I'm located in Asian countries, and in here, the Asian farmers are going through enormous financial obligations to the loans, governments, various natural calamities, and other things. Now, what I see here, it just questions me. Hollywood star, Bollywood stars, corporate world, politicians, industrialists get huge amount of money. So I think the entire world's economy is not even 5% is spends on farming or farming culture or farming businesses. So the farmers are the ones who provide food to every single person, whether it's a poor person on the street to the president of any countries. But at the same time, in return, the farmers has to go through various means and struggle times. So I feel it's disproportionate hard work. The farmers work hard and earn money, but somebody punching keypads on our laptops or a computer gets huge amount of salaries in return. So I think the farmers must get their returns in proportionate to the people who earn money, so that share of the things can be done. I don't know how it is possible, but the president of any countries or things should be $1 million for one square meal. That should be the price, and the proper person should get, and then the proportionate money should be spent. This is my way of looking at business, because the world is right now working as a criminal past, I think, 150, 200, maybe 300 years. Farmers have been exploited to the no extent. And there are land grabbers are there, land sharks are there, local criminal cabals are there. There are drug peddlers, there are different criminals are there who has huge amount of profits made through the farmers' hard work. This is my experience. So I think worldwide government has to change their ways and means of tagging and labeling. And in India here especially, people are, there's no restriction for a barber. Barber can charge 5,000 quid, but the farmer has to pay their grain of rice for a particular price. So the farmers is fixed that you cannot go beyond this limit. You have to sell your all things, and they are unable to pay back their dues and loans. That's it.
And that you know, that's where over and above governance, policy on a national and global level come in, you know, and we can question, do we have strong enough will in political circles and through governance to create the changes that are necessary even, but yeah, that's another discussion.
Unfortunately, what I found here in the Asian countries, people who are today owning lands are not the ones who are doing farming.
Yep.
The people who are doing
That's
farming here are the all infiltrators or the migrants from the
Yeah.
other places, and they act
and
as a slaves here, and they don't have right kind of earnings. And the politicians and the policy making and the bureaucrats exploit them to the no limits, and there are no right kind of so your policy making and your all those things will come in place at the later stage. At this point in time, the criminal behavior towards farmers globally has to come to an full stop, and people have to put their foot down that people who work hard needs to be paid, and people who steal, rob, kill and do illegal activities needs to be. But unfortunately, the systems and the governments are protecting those who are stealing, robbing, and killing, and not people who are working hard.
And I think if I may, Ram, I mean, this is a symptom of the lack of value we have given to Mother Earth as a whole. And it represents through the farmers, it represents through the feminine, it represents to anything that has to do with valuing life and valuing the soil and the work that is done in the soil, which is the system that sustains the humans. So when I hear you, and we can all feel the fire inside us, like, okay, you know, and I mean, you're telling your story, and we all have it, I think, and we've seen the damage that has created, right? And to me, it has been a whole journey of, you know, how do I turn that around? How do I open the eyes to people of the switching the pyramid that we have to do, that we are valuing things that are superficial, that are not related to life, and that's what's killing us, and we have to flip it, and starting with landowners being the land stewards, starting from there, and then having these wider conversations on the system level, etc. But I want to go back a little bit to one comment in the chat. Let me see who made, I think it was Tobias who made it, who said, we have to, this is about the mentality, the mindset, the paradigm that we're operating under. And it's only something that through experience we can get to connect. So these conversations, so we started with regenerative business, and we cannot help to move towards a larger conversation, which is what is the role of business, what is, you know, all that is going wrong in terms of farming and all of the things that are going wrong, and devaluing life in general. And I invite us for the last couple of minutes to try to go into what could that look like? What would that ideal business look like? It would have to be supportive of life. It would have to regenerate. It would have to measure impact based on improving the regenerative capacities of the bioregion. It would have to, let's make a wish list of how that business would be worth of the word regeneration. Let's give it a try. I apologize if I'm
Can I
not
come in?
pronouncing your name properly. Uhuru?
Yes, I love this point. Thank you, Carolina, for bringing us into that dreaming. My point was really a share of what I'm learning and practicing in developing towards a regenerative business model. And, you know, definitely have learned that if there is any hierarchy, it's, you know, that nature supremacy seems to be that's the boss, you know, and so organizing our governance around the supremacy of nature. Also that it's relational, that the business is, you know, first and foremost connected and supportive of all the different systems in our bioregion, including on the individual level. Curiosity seems to be a really important piece, so that there's like space, there is a space for curiosity. Also needs responsiveness. This business that is regenerative needs to be able to respond to needs at all the systemic levels, as well as to develop anti-fragility. And that means not necessarily going beyond bouncing back to what we were, but actually developing strength in places where we're experiencing mistakes, assaults, problems. And also that, of course, investment into the bioregional regeneration, investment into our habitat. These all are just on my on my journey. These points are the ones that, I put into the fire with all of you to share.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to see, thank you. These were very good qualities. Would anyone else want to jump into that space? Meaning, when we jump into what is that ideal one? We're also not pulling, but we're helping process many things, right? So, as we go through the journey of complexity and understanding the paradigms that have taken us away from nature and how they have failed and all of that, when we look somewhere and we say, there is something here that might work, how do we call it, how do we name it, what characteristics, without fooling ourselves, but really looking at nature and what a natural system looks like. So that's what I think. And as
Can I make a very short
yes,
comment?
please. Yes.
Yeah, it's the businesses are generally controlled by their investors and not by themselves. So a family business is generally controlled by the family funds that allowed it to begin, the startup funds from the family, the wider family, and has to follow family rules. And so it behaves. Now, other businesses who use public funds rely on world financial system rules, and so they misbehave because they're forced to stay in business against ever multiplying competition, take more and more investment, return more and more profits. It's a blind alley of multiplying distress on the world and on people. So it's where the money comes from, or how the systems behave. So we need to define rules for the larger system as to how it should behave. That's sort of like family rules.
Yes. Yes. So we're gonna start to close, and I think we heard some very inspiring insights into how that business could look like, right? We went into the naming of it. Is it correct? Is it not correct? Its role, right? What is the role of the business? We said it should be healthy. First of all, we said, can business do that? Can we even have such high hopes of business? And we heard some attributes here and there, some characteristics here and there. My personal request to all of us here is to dig into those companies that have done some sort of journey in this field, and they have nailed down some principles like Raya was mentioning. These are context-based principles, of course, but some principles are of nature and they are across the earth. So what are those principles? You can look into biomimicry principles. You can go into many regenerative principles that are out there. There are so many things that are guiding us if we just looked. if we just took the time to explore and give it a chance, right? Not only to understand, but to act. And when we act and think, then we really start becoming. So Jenny, help me in rounding anything that I might have missed, so that we all say goodbye for this session that has been so rich.
Well, Carolina, firstly, thank you for inviting me to this session, because I hope it has been for everybody really rich. And I think that the one thing that I would observe here is there are no solutions here. There are no answers. There's just an experimental journey into an uncertain and unknown future. But the things that we do know, that we can't carry on the way we are, otherwise we're toast. And you know, the role of business, the role of humans in the living system that is Earth, it is a deep discussion that we will all keep having. But I think the most important thing that I often take away from these conversations is that whilst we're conversing, we shouldn't allow that to stop us from acting. That we have to find ways to be confident, to dance with the complexity of not knowing, wanting to discuss and know and feel secure, but acting nevertheless, and continuing that dance of complexity where we can't know the answers because we can't see into the future. And what really warms my heart about this summit is that the thing that it recognizes, that we all recognize, whether in business or in bioregional design or whatever that we're in, is collective intelligence is the way forwards. Coming together and sharing stories and insights and experiments that failed and ideas that failed iteratively is the only way that we learn. So thank you for inviting me. I'm not sure I contributed a lot to this rich discussion about business, but it was so exciting to listen to all of you and hear us all, you know, grappling with this incredible moment in time in many ways in which we're privileged to live.
Beautiful, Jenny. Thank you. I'm not gonna add anything except
Thank you so much.
RCN. Thank you, Ram. The RCN.
Can I add one more point?
No, we are finishing that, Ram. Not right now.
Melina is taking control of the microphone.
I am the host now.
All right. Loss is yours.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you very much, Carolina. And thank you, every one of you who are interested and weaving the path of this liquidification of humanity in order to metamorphosis to go to another state of organizations.
We are all becoming butterflies, Melina. We are
exactly
all activating our imaginal cells, and we are becoming.
Yes, we are all becoming butterflies, and that's a very, very powerful metaphor, especially for RCN. And we are really, really grateful to having you here both, and keep with the radical collaboration we are engaging in this summit. So be around, assist to other of conversations, and for everyone, this is over. If you want to stay in this room and stay with conversations, you can do so. But for now, I will stop the recording and see you next time.